Every ghoul in Fallout is dying of the same thing, just at completely different speeds. Some of them outran it long enough to turn into legends, mayors, gunslingers, and doomsday prophets the wasteland still tells stories about. Most didn't. So what actually happened to every ghoul in Fallout? The answer runs all the way from a Hollywood cowboy to a man who has spent 2 centuries begging somebody to kill him, and almost every stop along the way is worse than it sounds: the gunslinger. Cooper Howard is the one to start with, and not only because he's the most famous ghoul going at the minute, despite being controversial, and from the new canon, he's still the best example we have to start because he's the rare case whose life as a person you actually get to see, before any of the rot set in, as some of the characters that come later in this list are too far gone, too changed to even remember what being human felt like. Cooper you get to watch fall, documented from the very start before even the bombs started falling. His story reveals far more than the TV show initially lets on, an important context that paints a picture most people skip right over, and the life he fell out of, looking back on it now, was almost obscene. He was a Western star, the hero in the white hat who pulled his own quick draws on camera. He had a wife called Barb who happened to work pretty high up at Vault-Tec, and a daughter named Janie who figured the cowboy on the poster and the man across the dinner table were the same person. He did commercials, signed autographs, and worked children's birthday parties in the cowboy getup, all through what would turn out to be the last good year California ever got. By the end, his star was fading anyway, partly because he kept turning down the roles that came bundled with Vault-Tec propaganda, and that's the part the show holds back, because it hits the hardest of all. Barb wasn't just cashing a Vault-Tec paycheck, she sat close enough to the top to be in the room when the executives talked about setting off the bombs themselves on their own schedule to make money, and Cooper spends those flashbacks slowly working out that the company keeping his family comfortable wasn't so much bracing for the end of the world as pricing it. Then the bombs he had quietly been warned about actually went off, and Cooper Howard walked out into the rest of his very long existence with radiation in his lungs and his whole life burning down behind him. 2 centuries on, he's still standing, and there's nothing left of the white hat. The face is gone, worn down to that cracked, noseless leather every wastelander recognizes on sight. What's left in place of the movie star is a bounty hunter who works for Caps and Information, forever following some very old trail back toward the people who signed off on ending the world. He's patient about it too, in the way only a man with unlimited time can really afford to be. He isn't a hero anymore, and he gave up pretending to be one a long time ago. These days, he spends the story chasing a thread back to his own scattered family and the ones who lit the match, hauling around a duffel bag of grudges 2 centuries deep, and the show is careful never to let you decide whether he's after justice or just after the last few people who still owe him an answer. Here's the part the show really makes you wonder, though. None of the second Cooper actually needed the radiation to explain it. 200 years of watching the wasteland chew up everyone he ever cared about would have hollowed the cowboy out on its own. The rot just moved the damage to the outside of him, where you could finally see it. That's the quiet argument the character keeps making the whole way through, that the ghoul was always in there somewhere, and the radiation only ever handled the outside appearance. There's a catch to Cooper still being Cooper, though, and the show is the first thing in the franchise to really spell it out. He carries a stash of vials in E. Very single one is the only thing standing between the bounty hunter and the monster. The chems don't cure anything, they just buy time, 1 dose at a stretch, and the day the supply runs dry, the countdown he's been managing for 200 years picks right back up. You even get to watch it happen to somebody else. A ghoul called Roger, an old friend of his, runs low mid-conversation and starts turning right there in front of him, his mind slipping away word by word until Cooper has to put down a man who was talking to him a minute earlier. That's the exact ending waiting on Cooper too, 1 missed dose away, and it's the whole reason he's the right place to start. He's not just a ghoul, he's a ghoul on the clock. And to understand that clock, and why the radiation did something so different to him than it did to the things in the tunnel, you have to look at what ghoulification actually does to a body. How you would change. Ghoulification is horrifying but simple when you get down to it. Radiation failing at its one job. That's basically how it works. And it's a much worse deal than the word immortal makes it sound. A lethal dose of radiation is supposed to be quick, and honestly, kind of dull. The cells of a body start breaking down faster than the body can repair them. The organs quit one by one, and inside of a few days, there's nothing left but a corpse. That's exactly what happened to nearly everyone unlucky enough to be caught outside when the sky lit up, and grim as it is, they got the clean death. Cooper wasn't so lucky. For some reason, the canon has spent 3 decades refusing to actually spell out. A small, unlucky minority had cells that mutated instead of giving up, and the radiation that should have finished them turned into the thing that keeps them running instead. What you end up with is a body stuck partway through dying and no longer able to reach the end of it. The skin dries dries out and splits. The hair goes. The whole face settles into that dried out, shrunken look, and underneath it, the cells keep patching themselves up off the same radiation that would drop a healthy person inside an afternoon. That's how Cooper is 200 years old. It's also why, in the games at least, a ghoul standing in a puddle of glowing sludge isn't losing health to it, it's soaking the stuff up like a warm bath, healing on the exact thing that's poison to everything else still alive. There's a reason the show can stand a barely marked ghoul with sharp features next to a classic sunken-faced wastelander and call them the same species. The process doesn't spit out one clean result, it spits out a range. Where a body ends up on that range is what decides whether the person reads as lightly scarred or as something a scavenger would strip for parts. The best guess for why it caught Cooper, and not the man standing right next to him at the blast, is the sheer amount of mutation-causing junk already floating around the pre-war world, call it leftovers, from a virus program that had been quietly poisoning the water and the air for years. That program has a name, the Forced Evolutionary Virus, cooked up in labs like West Tech long before anyone needed a shelter. And it's the same stuff behind super mutants and half the other horrors crawling around the map. So when the radiation finally hit, a few bodies had some switch that flipped them into mutation instead of death, and Cooper's was one of them. Which ones and why is a coin toss nobody in any of the games can call, and I gave up waiting on an answer that pretty clearly was never written down. None of that, though, is the part that should actually worry you. A ghoul who holds on to his mind, like Cooper, is really just a person with a rough complexion and a very long memory. The horror is what the process gets up to next, once it decides it isn't done with you yet. And that's the thing every thinking ghoul on this list spends the rest of their endless life trying to stay ahead of. John Hancock. John Hancock did this to himself on purpose, and that one fact makes him the most interesting man in Boston. Almost every ghoul you're going to meet had ghoulification done to them. Hancock read the risks, basically shrugged, and took the dose anyway. He runs Good Neighbor in Fallout 4, a lawless little pocket of the city where the one rule is that you leave harmless people be. He backs that rule up personally, with a straight razor and a red colonial coat. He lifted off a museum dummy because he liked the swagger of the original patriot whose name he borrowed. Before the coat and the chems, he was an ordinary-looking troublemaker with a stubborn streak of decency, and the moment that really made him was gutting a Vault-Tec-flavored bully named Finn in the open street for shaking down the town's rejects. The ghoulification came after that, and entirely on purpose. He got hold of some experimental radiation-soaked drug, the kind of thing that comes with a warning label a smart person would actually listen to. He tells the story himself, if you ask. A younger, wilder version of him, chasing the next high, gets handed a vial of something new and radioactive, takes it knowing full well it might kill him, and decides the gamble is worth it. He describes standing there feeling his own skin start to turn and choosing not to stop, which is a pretty specific decision to make about your own face. By his own account, he's never once regretted it, because it burned off the last soft parts of who he used to be, and left him permanently, unmistakably himself, with a clock that runs a lot longer than a smoothskin's. There's a bitter little family footnote stapled to all of this too. Hancock's own brother is John McDonough, the mayor of Diamond City, the man who stood up on a stage and had every ghoul in town run out into the wasteland to fend for themselves. So, the wasteland's favorite ghoul folk hero happens to be the brother of its most famous ghoul hater, and neither of them ever brings it up. For a man whose whole philosophy is that you get to decide who you are, rewriting his actual body into the shape of that idea is almost admirably consistent, which is more than you can say for most people out here. Raul Tejada. Raul Tejada is tired, and it's the very specific, bone-deep kind of tired that belongs to a man who ran out of reasons to keep going about a century ago and kept going regardless. He's the ghoul who shows you the actual bill for living this long. When you find him in New Vegas, he's a prisoner up at Black Mountain, kept alive by a paranoid super mutant named Tabitha, for the simple reason that a working mechanic is worth more breathing than dead, which is, honestly, a pretty fair summary of how the whole wasteland rates him. He didn't start out this tired. For a stretch after the bombs, he was something close to a hero, a gunslinger who looked out for the people around him and built a real reputation doing it. He was the kind of guy they'd write songs about if anyone had lived long enough to write them. He was a young man in Mexico when the war came, and his history since is a long, patient tally of loss. The sharpest entry on it is his sister Rafaela, shot dead by a looter in the ruins while Raul was a couple of rooms too far away to stop it. That was 200 years ago, give or take. He still talks about it like it happened last week, because being pretty much unkillable does absolutely nothing to blunt grief. It just hands grief a lot more time to settle in and get comfortable. What makes Raul land is that his skill and his weariness are the same thing. He's a superb gunslinger and an even better mechanic. and he's quietly sure his best years wrapped up around the time everyone he loved did, leaving a couple of centuries of overtime. Nobody asked him to work, recruit him, and his personal quest is basically an argument over whether he ought to keep being the old gunfighter or finally, mercifully, put the pistol down. You settle it by hauling him around to meet other old survivors, Oople like Ranger Andy and Cass, and depending on who leaves the bigger mark, he either doubles down on the guns or hangs them up for good. The game quietly turns his combat perk into a question of whether a 200-year-old man is allowed to just be done. Raoul kept his mind and every one of his skills, which means he never got the mercy of forgetting. It all just piles up. The list of people he's outlived only gets longer, and sooner or later the simple math of being the last one standing at every funeral becomes its own slow injury, the kind no Stimpack touches. Charon kept his mind and then lost the right to use it, which is a nastier trick than anything the radiation ever pulled. He's a fully intelligent man wearing an invisible leash, and whoever picks up the other end owns him outright. In Fallout 3, he stands guard in Underworld, the ghoul town wedged into the bones of the old Museum of History, working muscle for a real nasty bar owner named Azrakal. Underworld is one of the only places in the capital wasteland a ghoul can just exist, with a doctor called Barrows patching people up and a bartender named Carol keeping the lights on. Charon spends his days as security for the Ninth Circle, the seediest place in an already grim little town. The catch is his contract. It's a slip of paper backed by conditioning drilled so far down into him that he physically has to obey whoever holds it, no argument, no refusal, whatever the order happens to be. Buy that contract off Azrakal and Charon transfers over to you like a piece of furniture. The first thing he does with his brand new ownership is walk over and calmly execute Azrakal, because the leash just changed hands and his old master is suddenly nothing more than another ghoul in the room. He does it without being asked, tells you the account is settled, and goes back to standing quietly at your shoulder. He isn't cruel about it and takes no visible pleasure in it, which is somehow the worst detail of the lot. A man carrying out an execution with the flat efficiency of someone who stopped getting a vote on his own actions a long time ago, and the game never once bothers to explain where the conditioning came from, who did it to him, or how long ago. That blank space is, in a strange way, more disturbing than any answer would have been. He's proof that keeping your mind isn't the same thing as keeping yourself. The flesh is intact, the intelligence is sharp, the resentment is clearly sitting there under the surface, and not one bit of it counts for anything against the paper. Ghoulification took Charon's face, and gave him 2 centuries to live with the theft, and something colder and a lot more human than radiation took everything behind it. Dean Domino. 200 years of undeath did nothing to improve Dean Domino, which is exactly why he's one of the sharpest characters the franchise ever put together. Some ghouls turned into warlords or prophets. Dean stayed a bitter lounge singer nursing a grudge over a robbery that never even paid out. Before the war, he was a genuine celebrity, a pre-war entertainer with a golden voice and an ego to match it. His masterstroke was going to be robbing the Sierra Madre casino on its grand opening, the most exclusive room in the world. The place was the obsession of a rich, lovesick guy named Frederick Sinclair, who built it to impress a woman, and Dean's heist got tangled up in that whole doomed romance from the start. The woman was a singer named Vera Keys. Dean knew her, and the plan was never as simple as robbing a casino. It was a mess of jealousy and payback and old grudges, and Sinclair, who was nobody's fool, had rigged the whole building to punish it. Then, it all came apart at once. The Sierra Madre sealed itself shut like a vault on the night it opened. Dean got ghoulified in the mess of his own plan, and he spent the 2 centuries since circling the one score that got away, unable to let it die. Meet him in the Dead Money add-on for New Vegas A, and he's exactly the man he was on opening night, only with 200 years of resentment piled on top. He's vain, petty, brilliant, and just plain unable to admit he lost, and he will grin at you the whole time he's arranging your death. He spends the entire story convinced he's running a con on you, right up to the moment you work out that the only mark he ever really had was himself, still waiting on a payday from a night that ended before your great-grandparents were born. His ghoulification is almost a footnote next to the rot in his personality, and that's the joke the writers were making. 2 extra centuries didn't make him one bit wiser. They just handed a con man forever to keep running the same con, and he'd sooner crumble into dust still lying about it than admit the casino beat him. For a character you spend maybe a few hours with, that's a crazy amount of rot to pack into one ego. And it's exactly why people still argue about Dean Domino more than they argue about most of the actual humans in that game. Jason Bright. Jason Bright looked at the end of the world, looked at his own rotting body, and decided the only move left was to get off the planet entirely. He's a glowing one, so soaked in radiation that he actually lights up, the kind of ghoul that's usually a bad week away from going mindless. And instead of falling apart, he started a religion and aimed it straight at the sky. In New Vegas, he leads the Bright Brotherhood, a congregation of ghouls holed up in the Repcon rocket test site, and his gospel is bleak, but honestly hard to argue with. He preaches that ghouls have no future in a world world that shoots them for existing, and that their salvation waits somewhere he calls the far beyond, reachable only by climbing into patched-up old rockets and firing themselves clean off the planet. It sounds unhinged, right up until you line it against every other option a ghoul on this list actually got, most of which end face down in a subway. The whole thing plays out in a quest pointedly named Come Fly With Me, and getting the rockets flight ready means first clearing a nest of invisible mutant squatters out of the basement, because nothing in the wasteland is ever just a launch pad. His flock shares the place with those cloaked mutants and a bald human janitor named Chris Haversam, who wants so badly to belong that he's actually talked himself into believing he's a ghoul too. Jason lets him keep the belief, because the man is useful, and the lie does no harm. Help the Brotherhood out and the rockets actually fire, carrying a congregation of the most despised people in the wasteland off toward whatever is up there. Whether that's salvation or just a very polite mass grave in orbit, the game flat out won't say. What sticks with me is that Jason is a glowing one who, by every rule the game's set, ought to be a mindless hazard by now. And instead he's running a faith and planning a way off the planet totally clear-headed. Every other glowing ghoul is a walking reactor with no name left. Jason is the one who saw that fate coming and decided to build a way out, even if the way out is a rocket pointed at nothing. The ones with no name. For every ghoul the wasteland bothers to remember, there are thousands it never will, and those nameless ones are the honest answer to what happened to every ghoul in Fallout. The named survivors are the exceptions that got lucky. The rule is the crowd at the door. A few of them at least got to be part of something before the end caught up. Necropolis, the poisoned city that grew out of the betrayed Vault 12, was held together by a ghoul named Set, who ran a functioning town in the original Fallout right up until the Master's super mutant army rolled through and wiped most of it off the map. Later, in Fallout 3, the ghouls of Underworld carved a refuge out of a museum, somewhere a rotting person could pour a drink and not get shot for the crime of looking like what the bombs made them. Their great triumph amounts to being left alone, which tells you exactly how low the bar is set. There are others scattered around who managed a version of the same small mercy. The ghoul farmers of the Slog work a tarberry pool up north, and Daisy over in Good Neighbor still remembers the world from before and will happily talk your ear off about it. Each of them is proof that a ghoul can build something so long as the wasteland just forgets to come kill them for a few decades, and even that's fragile, because plenty never get so much as a town. Take Gob, tending bar in Megaton, a good-natured ghoul who came up out of Underworld and now spends his days flinching under a human boss who abuses him for sport and pays him in scraps. Fallout 4 finds the one angle darker than all of it, with Billy Peabody, a ghoul child frozen at 10 years old for 2 centuries, found hiding inside an old refrigerator. He will never grow up, and never once be allowed to forget that most people look at him and see a monster to put down. But most ghouls don't get a bar or a name in a terminal or a rescue quest. Most of them just get the slow slide and a last credit as scenery in some dungeon, gunned down by a player who never spends half a second wondering whose father they just killed. That's the fate the whole condition drains toward. The slow slide almost every ghoul reaches in the end, and that slide, the actual end of the road, is worth stopping to look at head on, because it's the thing every single name on this list has spent their whole long life running from. The clock, that slow slide the nameless ones vanish into, has a name, and it's the end of the road for almost every ghoul in Fallout. Feral. It's the second stage of ghoulification, the one that doesn't stop when the rot is done. It keeps grinding away, quietly, until it scrubs the person out completely. The memory gone, the name gone, the whole 200 years just emptied out, and what's left runs on nothing but the urge to tear into anything with a pulse. Push it further, and you get the glowing ones. Ghouls so soaked in radiation that they light up the dark and cook whatever gets near them. The process taken all the way to its ugliest possible finish. A glowing feral isn't a person who went bad. It's a hazard that used to have a birthday. The games go one worse with Reavers, ferals so warped and radioactive they lob chunks of their own glowing gore and shrug off firepower that would drop a deathclaw. The process shoved so far past human that the word barely means anything. The cruelest cases, though, are the ones lucid enough to see it coming. Ghouls, like the ones rotting under Tenpenny Tower in Fallout 3, can feel their own minds thinning out, and they know for a fact there's no treatment, no quest, no serum in any game that has ever walked a feral back into a human being. Once the slide finishes, it's finished. For good, and everyone in the wasteland knows it. That's most of the reason a stranger shoots a ghoul on sight instead of saying hello. So that's the finish line every ghoul on this list has been running from, the mindless thing at the door. For almost all of them, reaching it is the worst thing that can happen. And then there's one ghoul who would give anything to reach it and can't. Harold. Harold got the ending that proves ghoulification has no floor at all, and he's been begging his way out of it almost since the day the bombs first dropped. If the feral in the tunnel is the ghoul who lost his mind, Harold is the crueler joke. The the ghoul who kept every scrap of his and can't use it to die. His story starts almost ordinary, which is exactly what makes the rest of it land. Back in the original Fallout, he's a weathered, mutated trader knocking around the hub, dealing in gossip and doing business, caught up in the same disastrous expedition that turned a man named Richard Gray into the Master, the mutant warlord hanging over the whole first game. So the same accident that produced the franchise's original nightmare also planted the thing that would slowly eat Harold, and for a good while, he just lived with it, a growth on his head he nicknamed and mostly ignored. He turns up again in Fallout 2, older and stranger, a fixture in a rough mining town where humans and mutants and ghouls actually share the same streets. Still trading, still talking, still carrying that odd little sprout around like a house guest he had learned to tolerate. By Fallout 3, that growth has won. Harold isn't walking anywhere anymore. He's fused into the ground at a place called Oasis, his body going to bark from the feet up, and the sprout on his skull has become a full tree. Its roots have pulled off the impossible, dragging a lush ring of living forest out of the deadest soil on the continent. In a country that grows nothing, Harold has accidentally become the single most fertile thing for miles. And of course, people showed up to worship him for it. A little cult called the Tree Minders tends the grove and treats the man quietly screaming inside the wood as a god of rebirth. Their leaders, a tree father and a leaf mother, run the place like a gentle theocracy and can't even agree on what their god actually wants. One would rather keep Harold contained, the other wants to spread his growth out across the wasteland, and neither of them ever stops to ask the god himself whether he'd just rather be dead. Harold's own opinion of his godhood is the bleakest punchline in the region. He can still think, still talk, still remember what real food tasted like before the world ended, and he's completely, totally worn out and done. He doesn't want worship. He wants to stop. He's wanted to stop for a very long time, not out of despair, which is the part that stays with you, but because he's just calmly decided that 200 years is plenty and the tree is welcome to the rest. He asks you to end it, to burn the whole thing down and finally let him out, and the tree minders won't allow it. And even if they did, his regeneration would just outrun the fire. There's no door left for him to walk through. The Oasis quest even lets you make it worse on purpose, feeding his growth to spread the forest further, which plenty of players do for the reward without quite clocking that they just sentenced a man who wants to die to a bigger, greener prison. He survived the apocalypse so thoroughly that survival itself turned into the sentence. Whether you honor his request or leave him rooted for the faithful to keep praying to is one of the quietest, heaviest choices Fallout 3 ever hands you, and the game flatly refuses to tell you which answer was the mercy. So that's what happened to every ghoul in Fallout, which turns out to be mostly the same thing happening at wildly different speeds to people nobody ever agreed to remember, a body that wouldn't finish dying, a mind on a timer, and a wasteland that files the whole population under either curiosity or target, depending on how much of themselves they managed to hang on to. A handful kept their names by being useful, or dangerous, or just too stubborn to disappear. The rest kept nothing, got filed under monster, and took a bullet in some hallway. And the difference between the bounty hunter in the cowboy hat and the thing chewing on a vault door was never really the radiation at all. It was only ever how many reasons each of them still had to keep holding that one very long breath. If you want to know exactly how ghoulification pulls all of this off and how it works inside a single human body, click the video on screen now.